The night the rain came in a fine mist over Boston, I told myself to breathe. A slow count in, a slower count out. Harbor and Pine glowed like a lighthouse at the corner. Evan waved from the booth he'd chosen. Sabrina slid a menu toward me, a smile polished at the edges. The server set down a tumbler of cranberry over ice. I could hear the room before I could feel it. Forks, low laughter, a piano stitched into the background, like a memory that couldn't decide if it wanted to stay. We were there to celebrate. $58 million tied off with signatures and wires, and a handshake that left my palm feeling older than 68. My son had texted a confetti emoji. He'd chosen the place. He'd chosen the time. "You did it, Dad," he'd said when I sat. "You always said you wanted to be done before 70. The glass took a ring of water from the table, a small moon that kept growing. I lifted it. The tart bit at the tongue. I placed it down. Sabrina's eyes flicked to the glass, back to me. It would have been nothing in a kinder world. "Excuse me, sir," he spoke from my shoulder. "The security guard?" "Not the bulky kind, the kind you don't notice until you do." He leaned, apology in the slope of his voice. "Could I borrow you for just a second?" His name tag read Marcus. He guided me toward the hallway near the restrooms. The hum of the dining room thinned to the hiss of the espresso machine. The light stepped down a shade. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he said. "But when your son stood up, I saw him pour something into your juice. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm wrong. He didn't finish. I looked at his eyes. People tell you the truth with their eyes when they're afraid of the noise their own voice might make. In a kinder world, I'd have laughed. I'd have called Evan back and asked him what ridiculousness this was. But the world teaches you a language you don't want when you've buried a wife who believed in goodness and left a son who learned to see you like a bank lobby. I turned back toward the table. My steps were steady. I sat. I made a joke about the weather to the server, because normal is a suit we wear while we're deciding if we might be dying. I lifted the cloth napkin, thick, hotel grade, folded into a triangle, and with a cough, pressed the lip of the glass to the fabric, letting the red seep in. 1, 2, 3 seconds. The napkin drank it until it was a bruise. I slipped the napkin into the inside pocket of my jacket. It nestled against my shirt like a secret. Object as words. A thick cloth napkin, heavy with cranberry, hidden where my heartbeat would remember it. "I might have overdone it this week," I said to Evan, patting my chest. "Let me head out early. Too much excitement for an old man." He laughed on cue. Sabrina glanced at her watch, an impatience that clicked. They stood, hugs performed, choreography of concern performed better. Outside, the rain had turned to mist that felt like breath. The valet asked if I needed a ride. I told him no. I told myself to breathe, again. One slow count in. One slow count out. I drove home the long way, the route my wife and I used to take when we wanted the city to show us its lights. She would have understood the quiet. She always did. At the kitchen counter, I laid the napkin out. The stain had spread in a soft map with jagged borders. I sealed it in a gallon bag with a slider I heard click like a safe closing. I placed the bag into another bag, then into another, nesting the worry like Russian dolls. I went to my office and pulled the card of a private lab from the drawer, where I kept documents that required the dignity of silence. I didn't call the police. I called my attorney. "Cynthia," I said when she answered on the second ring. It was late, but she told me once that I was allowed to be a problem if the problem had teeth. "I have something that needs a chain of custody." She listened. She didn't fill the air with explanations. She said, "We start early. Don't panic. Don't speak to anyone. Drink water. Sleep if you can." The night pressed against the windows in a patient way. I wrote a sentence on a yellow legal pad in my wife's handwriting from memory. "Remember who you are." It didn't look like her writing, but it felt like her voice. How to, gentle and brief. When something feels wrong, create space. Do not confront in the moment. Preserve potential evidence without contamination if you can, and record your steps and times. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. The morning was stainless. I drove to the lab with a thermos of coffee and the bags arranged in a banker's box I'd labeled with the date and the time, because order is another kind of prayer. The receptionist knew Cynthia's name, and yes, chain of custody matters, and yes, they would log the transfer, and yes, they would expedite. She asked whether I wanted notifications by email. I gave her an address I use for things that must not be lost. Back at home, I stood in the doorway of the room where my wife had kept her art books. The spines made a color chart along the shelf. She'd loved animals with a devotion that had the steadiness of ritual. She used to say that kindness made her brave. I wondered what word for brave I might find before this was finished. At 10 o'clock, Cynthia's number lit my phone. "We're going to work 2 tracks," she said. "Evidence and boundaries." She speaks in straight lines. "I want bank alerts on every account, daily summaries. I want your transfers over a threshold paused unless you say otherwise. We revoke any powers of attorney we can find. We check whether anyone tried to access your medical records. We assemble a list of your assets and beneficiaries to the halfpenny. Then we wait for the lab." I saw her glance at the glass, I said. I didn't know why I said it. Perhaps I wanted facts to have a companion. "That goes into the chronology," she said. "Not as a conclusion, as a detail." I drove to my bank. I am known there. I shook hands with a manager who had seen my hair go from black to steel. "Temporary spending freeze," I said. "Daily alerts, no new beneficiaries. 2-step verification everywhere. My attorney will send a letter." He nodded as if we were closing the door on a cold draft. The calendar filled in ways that had nothing to do with celebration. Cynthia's paralegal took down a list of my assets. I forwarded her a spreadsheet I keep that my son never asked to see. Checks are easier to write when someone else has already counted for you. The paralegal thanked me with the efficiency of a person who can build a universe from receipts. At noon, Cynthia called again. "There are inquiries on your health portal," she said. "At least 2 attempts. We don't have confirmation of access, but we have attempts." "How?" I asked, though I knew the answer. A shared password once, a note that was not shredded, the routine faith of our family. "We will reset everything," she said. "We will revoke any patient proxy. We will find if there's a forged document, and if there is, we will hold it in our hands and let it tell us what we need to know." Object as words, a medical proxy form, with a signature that doesn't land on the line the way mine does. the ink a shade too even, the date that stumbles. We hadn't found it yet, but I could feel it the way you feel a splinter you haven't seen. By afternoon, we had calls out to a gallery. There had been rumors of inquiries about the collection my wife kept for decades, etchings of small birds, oils of winter marsh. We'll ask for a written confirmation of any conversations, Cynthia said, and we'll get consent recordings where consent is required. That evening, I microwaved soup and ate it standing up, the spoon tapping the bowl. I let the house settle. In my office, I opened a drawer and took out a heavy gray folder with a green tab, my own label in block letters, Trust. I slipped a clean red paperclip onto the draft Cynthia had sent years ago. It felt like a bright thread in a fabric that needed reinforcement. Object as words, a gray folder, a green tab, a red clip, a map of what could be defended. How to, gentle and brief. Inventory, what matters. Accounts, policies, titles, proxies. Document everything, and grant temporary blocks or alerts when you feel exposed. Keep originals safe, and work through counsel if you can. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. The lab report arrived the next morning. It came by encrypted email and by a call that started with a verification code. The words were clinical and cold. They let the weight sit in them. Metaprolol. Concentrations not consistent with ambient contamination. I printed it on heavy paper because the gravity of certain pages should be felt in the hand. I took a pen and drew a faded underline beneath the compound's name. Not a highlight, not a shout. A quiet line, like a knuckle on the table to call a meeting to order. Cynthia read it a few minutes later. We proceed, she said. You have choices. We can call the police now. We can set a confrontation. We can do both. I want to do this without spectacle, I said. If there is a way, there is, she said. We tell him to come in. We lay out what we have. We set boundaries. We offer a choice that keeps you safe. I sat in the car outside her office before the meeting and let the steering wheel be a kind of altar. I have loved my son since he was a weight on my shoulder the first time he slept there. Love doesn't vanish. It doesn't obligate you to surrender. Both are true at once. We assembled the table. The gray folder at the center. The lab report on top, a small stack like a stone. A transcript of the gallery call. The manager's customized warning about my accounts. The screen captures from my health portal where the timestamp circles itself like a flare. Object as words. A stack of paper breathing quietly. A simple manila envelope with a single key card. A letter opener resting across the top as if it could hold the weight in place. Evan arrived with Sabrina 10 minutes late and an apology that smiled. He wore a jacket he could not afford without help. Cynthia greeted them with the respect she gives to everyone and the softness she gives to no one. Dad, he said, reaching for the back of the chair as if to guide me into it. I was already seated. Cynthia opened the folder and slid the lab report forward. The underlined word was there, patient. Before we begin, she said, this is a conversation in a law office. I recommend you read carefully and take your time. We can pause at any point. I don't know what this is, Sabrina said, her voice thin. What this is, Cynthia said, steady, is a lab finding, a substance in a beverage, a chain of custody documented. a timeline. Evan looked at me and then at the paper and then at the door. He didn't move. His posture said he might. I spoke. The room had waited for me, too. I asked myself, Evan, I said, if there was a version of this where I could keep pretending nothing was wrong. I wondered if that would be an act of love. It felt like an act of fear. He opened his mouth, closed it. The paper waited, too. Cynthia slid another document forward. We have multiple attempts to access Mr. Carver's health portal, she said. We have this. She placed the questionable medical proxy next, which appears to be a forgery. We have your recent debts summarized. We have contact with a gallery about works that do not belong to you. We will be very clear with you about the implications, and we will give you a choice about how to proceed. Sabrina exhaled through her nose, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. This is insane, she said. Insane, I said quietly. Is a father pretending he doesn't see his own house on fire? I thought of the napkin then, its weight in my jacket that first night, its quiet loyalty. I thought of Marcus, his eyes telling me what his mouth was afraid to. The room had no music. It was pure air and paper, and the soft click of a pen cap as Cynthia readied the next page. What came next was not a performance. It was a line. We drew it. We placed terms on the table like stones on a cairn, marking the right path in a fog. We revoke any power of attorney or health proxy you may have, Cynthia said, effective now. We remove any access to accounts. We set your ability to direct any of Mr. Carver's funds to zero. We will amend the trust. You have a choice to sign acknowledgments, to accept the consequences, and to leave this room with a chance to reset your life without a criminal complaint filed this afternoon. And if we don't, Sabrina asked, then we will send this file to the proper authorities before you reach your car, Cynthia said. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. I looked at my son and tried to find the baby he'd been. I found a man who was afraid of consequences. Sometimes that is the nearest you can get. He swallowed. You're cutting me off, he said, as if the words themselves were a kind of injury. I'm cutting off the part that hurts us both, I said. I'm leaving the part that hopes. I placed a letter I had written on top of the stack last. It was not a legal document. It said only this. There is a door in front of you. You can walk through it, or you can walk away. I will be here with my dignity whether you join me or not. How to, gentle and brief. When you set boundaries, write them down. Be specific about access, spending, proxies, and consequences. Offer a path forward that is safe for you. Say as little as possible and as much as is necessary. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. There are silences you remember the shape of. The one that followed belonged to 4 people and a stack of paper. It lengthened until the room grew a second door. The kind people can leave through without saying the words they are not ready to say. Evan shifted. Sabrina whispered something I didn't catch. Cynthia watched the clock for them, patient with the logic that time has when it decides to be useful. I need to think, he said at last. You may, Cynthia said. We'll give you a printed copy of what we're proposing. If you choose not to sign today, you leave with the understanding that the evidence in this folder does not evaporate on the sidewalk. He nodded. He looked older than he had an hour before. The price of returning to the world after the truth has touched your sleeve. They left the room. The door clicked in this soft office way designed to be gentle. I exhaled into the space they didn't occupy. My hands were steady now. It surprised me. Cynthia closed the folder. "You did what you needed," she said. "We'll prepare the amendments. We'll draft the revocations. We'll place the accounts in a trust that cannot be gamed. We'll appoint an independent trustee until the storm passes." "Will the storm pass?" I asked. "It will change shape," she said. "We can live with that." I watched her pen move across a checklist, crisp and unsentimental. The red paper clip caught the light and threw it back like a tiny, practical sunrise. Outside, the mist had lifted. The city went about its day, unremarkable and sturdy. What I knew then was simple. Quiet justice is not a spectacle. It is a series of small doors you close behind you until you enter a room where you can breathe. The first door had been a folded napkin. The second, a lab report with a single word underlined. The third, a stack of paper, a clipped tone, a sentence that would not stretch to soothe any more. I did not owe the world a show. I owed my wife the stewardship of what she loved, and I owed myself the dignity of not pretending a lie was a son. We stepped into the hallway, Cynthia to her office, me toward the elevator. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert, a reminder to call the bank about the daily summary. I smiled at the ordinariness of it. This is how you save your life, I thought. In errands, in paper, in the precise use of your voice. The call came 2 mornings later. Evan's name on my screen looked younger than the voice that followed. "We'll come in," he said. No apology, a tremor where certainty used to live. After we ended, I placed the phone beside the gray folder and aligned their edges, small order against a larger disorder. In the hours before the meeting, I visited the room with my wife's books. I chose a thin field guide she used to carry in her coat pocket, warblers and wrens, margins annotated in her tidy hand. Object as words, a slender book with a cracked spine, corners rounded by years. I slid it into the briefcase, not as evidence, but as ballast. At Cynthia's office, the air was the same practical temperature truth prefers. She had added 2 envelopes to the stack. Revocations for powers of attorney and health proxies, drafted and ready. "We'll keep our tone," she said. "We won't perform. We'll state, we'll pause, we'll let the paper do its work." Evan and Sabrina arrived on time, as if punctuality could argue for innocence. They sat. Cynthia laid the first envelope in front of me and then in front of them, a mirror of consequence. "These are revocations," she said, "effective upon signature. They ensure no one acts for Mr. Carver without his explicit consent. Please read them." Sabrina scanned quickly, then slowed at a paragraph with a lot of commas. Evan stared at the first line, the way people stare at closed doors. He cleared his throat. "It's not what you think," he said, to the wood grain, to the ceiling, to a jury we had not invited. "What I think," I said, "is that we're here because a pattern became a line, and the line had to be drawn." Cynthia turned a page. "The amended trust will place the majority of assets in an irrevocable structure with an independent trustee," she said. "Distributions will be charitable in keeping with Mrs. Carver's interests. There will be a limited single-time transition grant available to you, Evan and Sabrina, for the sole purpose of stabilizing your immediate obligations under conditions you must meet. This is an offer, not an entitlement. Sabrina's mouth tightened. You're humiliating us, she said softly, as if soft could make it true. No, I said. I'm refusing to be humiliated by what nearly happened. We moved through the pages. The lab report waited its turn like a clock. The gallery transcript made its small sound when Cynthia placed it down. An itemized list of debts lay between us, numbers like little cliffs. Object as words. A ledger printed in monochrome. The rows lined up as if they could hold a person upright. Do you want me dead? I asked suddenly, not as accusation, but as the one question the body insists on receiving aloud. Evan's face changed. Something loosened in it, something that had been gripping a story made of excuses. No, he said, and he was a boy for a moment, a boy who had lost the path and wanted someone to see him looking for it. He stopped. I was drowning. Drowning explains water. It does not excuse pulling another under. Cynthia kept her voice even. Here is the choice, she said, and she laid it out again. A map with only 2 roads. Sign the revocations. Sign the acknowledgement that you will not contest the amended trust. Accept the conditions of the transition grant. Financial counseling with documentation. Employment within a set period. Therapy focused on boundaries and accountability. Or refuse, and we forward this file to law enforcement by close of business today. Sabrina looked at Evan, and the look said all the words she could not arrange. He reached for the pen. His hand shook, then steadied. He signed where the flag tabs told him to. Sabrina signed too, lips pressed white, each stroke a surrender to oxygen. I added my name last. It felt less like victory than like turning a key in a lock you should have replaced years ago. How to, gentle and brief. When agreements must be made, give yourself structure. Put conditions in writing, define timelines and consequences, and let documents speak where anger wants to shout. Invite neutral professionals, trustees, counselors, accountants, to hold the center. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. We took a measured breath as a room. Cynthia gathered the signatures with the respect she gives to fixtures of a safe house. We will notarize now, she said. You'll receive copies. The trustee will contact you with a schedule. Evan stood and didn't look at me. Sabrina did, briefly. Whatever she meant lived behind her eyes and stayed there. When the door closed, Cynthia and I remained as if the air needed time to unclench. You gave them a door, she said. You didn't walk through it for them? I can live with that, I said. In the weeks that followed, the shape of my days changed. The Quaker quality of quiet justice is this. It leaves you with the mundane as a form of grace. I forwarded bank summaries and received confirmations from the trustee's office. I learned the names of 2 women who would oversee the charitable disbursements with sober joy. We opened a new account labeled only with the working name of the foundation, Eleanor Carver Fund, and I watched as zeros moved in clean lines from the places where money idles to the places where money works. The first grant was small by the standard that had ruined our family. Art workshops at the neighborhood center where my wife once volunteered, and a veterinary assistance fund for seniors who could not afford care for their old animals. Object as words, a stamped letter of award, A thank you note written in a hand that looped wide, a photograph of a terrier with too much dignity to understand he was being helped. I met with a museum director about placing 3 of my wife's favorite pieces on long-term loan. He treated the paintings like breathing things, and I left with the sense that memory can be kept without being possessed. On a Thursday, I took a folded sheet of paper to the Charles River. The weather had the hesitant warmth of spring training to be summer. Rowers moved like metronomes. I read aloud 2 lines from my wife's journal, the ones about kindness and bravery, and let the edges of the page flutter like they were hearing her. I did not know yet how Evan would meet his conditions, or whether he would stumble and blame the ground. I knew only that my side of the fence was built. Fences do not hate what they keep out. They protect what they keep in. How to? Gentle and brief. Healing is logistics with gentleness. Schedules, reviews, small rituals. Build a counsel for your future. A trustee, a therapist, a friend who tells the truth. Direct your resources where your values live. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. When the certified copy of the amended trust arrived, it came in a heavy envelope with embossed initials. The independent trustee's name sat alongside mine, not above, and that felt right. I signed the final page with the slowness of a person who understands the gift of consequences. Object as words, a pen that moves evenly, a red paperclip that now belongs to a complete file, a safe that closes with a soft mechanical sigh. Later that week, Cynthia and I held a brief closing meeting. She read through a checklist, each item accompanied by a tidy check mark. Revocations recorded, she said. Trust funded, trustee appointed, transition grant escrowed pending verifications, health portal secured, accounts monitored, gallery notified and acknowledged. What remains? I asked. Life, she said. It sounded like a verdict I could accept. I wrote to Evan that night. Not a speech, not another door, just a single page. I told him where I'd be on Saturday morning if he wanted to walk with me by the river. I told him there would be no talk of money, only of weather and the names of small birds, if he liked. I signed it simply, Dad. Saturday came. I waited. He didn't. Some endings attend themselves with bells. Others prefer the sound of geese and bicycle chains. I walked anyway. I named a warbler wrong and laughed aloud. I sent a photograph of the river to the trustee because accountability can be a kindness to the self. I donated in my wife's name to the neighborhood center again. A modest recurring amount, the kind that threads months together. That evening, I took the napkin, the first door, from the safe where it had slept since the lab. I unfolded it. The stain had faded to a brown like dried leaves. I placed it in a small archival sleeve with the label. Evidence retained. Not because I wanted to keep the wound fresh, but because time makes fools of us when we do not keep the record. How to, gentle and brief. Keep essential proofs organized and out of sight. Reduce reminders of harm in your daily spaces while preserving what you may someday need. Practice rituals that honor what was good. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. The following month, the foundation board met for the first time. 3 people at a table in a community room with fluorescent lights. A museum educator, a veterinarian who had once treated our old Labrador for free, and a retired accountant whose sense of humor was dry enough to keep us honest. We read proposals with the appropriate amount of hope. We approved 5. We went home to ordinary dinners. On my desk, I keep a single photograph. My wife in a knitted hat, laughing at a cardinal on the fence, her hand mid-gesture as if she were conducting a small symphony of red and winter. I tell her what we're doing with her name. I tell her about the letters we receive, thank you notes with coffee stains, line items balanced, dogs lived, quiet justice, I say to her in the room that remembers her. Not the kind that needs a crowd, the kind you can carry in your pocket and not drop when you bend to tie your shoe. When Evan finally called, it was to say he had started the counseling the trustee required. He said he had a job interview. He did not mention the river. All right, I said. The truth did not demand a speech. It required only the next clean step. You cannot fix a life with a document. You can defend a life with one. You cannot repair a family with a fund. You can honor a love with it. In the end, I wanted air I could breathe and a story that did not ask me to pretend. I wanted a future that used my hands for building rather than bracing. The city obliged. The river obliged. The world, unafflicted by my private courtroom, turned quietly, offering a place to stand. There is an inventory on my kitchen corkboard now. 3 columns, simple headings. People, papers, practices. Under people, I have 4 names and a small heart next to hers. Under papers, I have a checklist whose boxes are full. Under practices, I have walk, write, give. Call Marcus to say thank you again. Object as words. A corkboard, 3 pushpins, a ballpoint pen that skips only on grease spots, a list that forgives you when you amend it. Some evenings I take the field guide from my briefcase and sit on the back steps. The pages smell like old libraries and raincoats. I try to learn the names again, the way a person learns to pronounce their own future without swallowing the hard sounds. And when a small bird lands on the railing, I whisper the name I think is right. If I'm wrong, there is no harm in the attempt. If I'm right, there is a quiet click inside me like a door choosing to stay open. Comment CTA. How would you guard the dignity and legacy of someone you loved? Firmly, quietly, and without spectacle, when pressure comes from inside your own family.